My firm began as a commodity trading advisor and later as a Chicago proprietary trading firm, employing statistical techniques, primarily spread trading in the natural resources futures markets. And one of my current additional activities is that I'm the contributing editor of the Global Commodities Applied Research Digest, which is a publication of the J.P. Morgan Center for Commodities at University of Colorado, Denver. I was interested when John mentioned his various staff who were distributed throughout the country, and that's as well with the publication that I do for this university in Denver. A colleague works for me closely on this, and she's in suburban Boston. Okay. So in high school and college, actually, my favorite activity was writing. I did so for the respective school newspapers. But I just, I didn't come from a background of means, and it just seemed the professional opportunities would be rather limited to the lucky or the brilliant. So I focused on majoring in a technical subject instead. I was very influenced by advice from my dad, who'd had a successful career. He came from a small farming community in rural Saskatchewan, Canada, and he had been very influenced by the play Death of a Salesman, and so he didn't want to be in a profession where it mattered, that your success mattered, how personable one was. He wanted things to be very objective, and so that influenced me in what I decided to do in college and graduate school. So this leads to insight number one, which is self-assessment is important. If you're a superstar, it's fine to go into a crowded field, but sometimes being successful means choosing something unique. Okay, so I was fortunate to get a scholarship to University of Chicago, so I decided to go there. And at the time, there wasn't a computer science major, so I majored in statistics, but I petitioned to basically have all my electives be in computer science. And so in this case, insight number two, I guess this, emphasizing the technical aspects of things might be, the audience being students at IIT would be very receptive to that decision making. But insight number two I would recommend is to get as much education as you can. They can foreclose on a mortgage, but not on your degree. Okay, so basically in choices, I've always tried to mix things that were things that I wanted to do anyway, but trying to figure out like a practical aspect to it. So my father had gotten a scholarship to study in London when he was in his 20s. So this captured my imagination. So when I was in college, I applied for about a dozen scholarships to London. And one came through to study statistics. So I figured, okay, I get to live in London, but this isn't flaky. I'm going to be studying statistics while I'm there. So insight number three in this case was try to do something interesting and different, as it sure does make for a great conversation during job interviews. Okay, so after I got a master's degree in London, I went to work in Chicago for Arthur Andersen. It's now Accenture. In their computer consulting division, and I worked on expert systems applications. But unfortunately, I was so used to 5 years of the life of the mind that I only lasted 13 months at Arthur Andersen. At the time, it was too much of I had too much of a culture shock experience to working in the real world. So I left that firm. And so their insight number four was to know your personality. Culture is very important to your success in a company. So after my brief stint at Arthur Andersen, a friend of mine who I'd been to college with recommended to me that I try working at a proprietary options trading firm and to do all their programming. And oh my goodness, I loved that job. I was 24 and I learned a lot while working for, well, at the time they did seem eccentric, but they measured people entirely on merit. At the time, there weren't readily understandable textbooks on options theory, so you basically had to get an apprenticeship role. The mathematicians there were happy to teach me about the strategies that were employed. And now when I think about it, I mean, they didn't make me sign a non-compete agreement that sometimes now goes with getting, mentored at a firm. So I became responsible for the department's software. Now, what happened with this firm was the head trader had that sort of risk-taking gene, and just making money off of steadily predictable arbitrage strategies just didn't work. And so this individual unsuccessfully bet on mean reversion on the long end of the futures bond futures curve when the position went against him. If he liked it at one level, and there was even better levels to get the position on as the trade went further and further against him. And so once the losses reached the parent firm's pain threshold, the department was closed. Okay, so then I went to Continental Bank. What was interesting was because I was on the software side, that's the technical side, it's objective. So the parent firm didn't think that I was part of irresponsible risk-taking behavior. So I was one of the only people from this department that was employed at the parent company. I went in, which was Continental Bank, which later merged into Bank of America. So I worked throughout all the various asset classes, derivatives trading desks, both in Chicago and in London, mainly writing software for the derivatives desks. But one's personal life is pretty important in guiding one's career, at least in my experience. And so my husband got his medical residency program in Boston. And I mean, I knew Chicago, I knew London, I knew Saskatchewan, Canada, but I didn't know Boston. And I knew that Fidelity was there, but that was about it. And this was before the internet. So in downtown Chicago, there'd been a newsstand that had international and national newspapers. Picked up the Sunday Boston newspaper, sent my CV off to a dozen recruiters. And so that's how I looked for a job in Boston. But at that point, I was still, leading edge on the technical area, so I wasn't really worried about getting a job. But so my next insight is having a meaningful relationship in your life is quite important, but it also means being quite flexible. So I did get a job, and it was at Harvard Management Company. I had absolutely no appreciation for where I had gotten a job, other than being happy that I got one before I moved to Boston. So this was the university's endowment management company. They were involved in just about every hedge fund strategy that you could possibly think of. Japanese warrant arbitrage, closed-end fund, country fund, relative value trading, convertible bond arbitrage, merger arbitrage. These guys later went on to create very large hedge funds. And so insight number 6 is, although at the time it does feel like location plus paycheck equals I'll take that job, you should think about what you're learning and where it might take you. So then when I worked for these traders in portfolio managers in a quant support role, I was sufficiently financially comfortable that what I was interested in was experiences, and I didn't want to be in the quant support role anymore. I wanted to be a trader. There was an ad in the Sunday Wall Street Journal in Boston that Bank of Boston was looking for hiring interest rate derivatives traders. So I applied to that job, and even though I was taking a pay cut, I wanted to be a trader. And so I took a few weeks off for some traveling in Europe. I read Fabozzi's, 3 of the Fabozzi Handbook of Fixed Income Securities chapters on interest rate swaps so that I'd be ready when I start the job. And it was very interesting because I found that I knew as much as anybody else on the trading floor having read these chapters. And just the aspect of when you see these anecdotes from traders about sort of the aspects of the formal trading. And so the head trader, my formal training when I joined the desk was don't F up. and so anyway, which was also useful for so eventually the mutual fund trading business was on a tear. And I left Bank of Boston, even though I actually enjoyed working at the company, because Putnam Investments was going to triple my pay. So I that was enough of an inducement that, it was then I came across insight number 7, which was sometimes the best thing to do in a career is to stand on a hill that turns into a mountain. And that's what was the case with the mutual fund industry. And kind of in line with my experiences at Bank of Boston, my first week at the job at Putnam, I was put before 6 SEC examiners to represent the company on its derivatives policies. That was my first week. So I wouldn't say I did a great job, but I got used to being put on the spot and learning how to deal with those activities. Okay, so later I moved to Chicago to start my own firm, basically because at some point the comfort from the monetary aspect versus really wanting to be a trader and also having the freedom to write kind of overwhelmed working at the mutual fund company. I have a longer kind of sort of summary of things with starting one's own company, and that is the outside world is so complicated that it's best to choose an activity that is as simple as possible. The other thing that I mentioned is that by being an independent, I could then also not only be involved in trading, but also carve out a niche as a financial writer. And the insights that I get as a financial writer are because of the attention that I've had really understanding markets, because of when one risks their own money in trading, it really forces you to focus on really understanding markets. So my final insight that I'm going to mention is in trading, nothing matches risking one's own money and quickly learning this domain. And I wish everyone here luck in their future careers.
We read dozens of news sources, so you only have to read one. John Lothian News.